although Zhitlowsky did not know the definition of the nation as an imagined community, like Benedict Anderson, nor would have called his analysis of societies a system of systems, like Niklas Luhmann, his approach seems to be very modern. At the beginning of the 20th century, he explained the development of nationalities out of social functions, analyzing social subsystems which work together to satisfy the economic and cultural needs of the people. He also insists that national characteristics do not constitute the essence of a people, but are rather relative to other nations. All this anticipates aspects of today's discussions. In doing so, he answers the question of what modern secular Jews should identify with nationally: their language and the secular appropriated religious and cultural Jewish heritage, understood as Nationalliteratur. The basic of this is the common universal human content of this heritage, which appears in a specific Jewish form. Linked to this, he develops a general paradigm of secularization and modern reappropriation of traditional religious content. However, he uses the essentialistic language of his time and therefore speaks of essence and of the nation and the national spirit, which threatens to obscure the modernity of his aspects, of his approach. The language-based Jewish community that Zhitlowsky envisioned was limited, imagined as the community of Yiddish speakers, excluding the non-Ashkenazi Jews, but lacked the other equally important defining feature of Anderson's, the imagined sovereignty. The model of cultural personal autonomy he advocated in continuation of his national theories, which he understood first as absolute, then as transitory on the way to the Jewish territory and state, was concretized in political and legal terms by his friend and comrade Moshe Silberfarb. He adapted ideas of the Austro-Marxist constitutional lawyer Karl Renner and the Austro-Marxist theorist Otto Bauer for Jewish purposes for the Tsarist Empire. He attempted, Silberfarb, the realization in 1917 in the revolutionary independent Ukraine, but he found no successes. So, second, society as a system of autonomously acting functions and the relationship between single peoples and nations. In 1988, that is connected to what you said, the Brünn Conference, and also before this conference, Zhitlowsky wrote in the newspaper of the Austrian Social Democrat Engelbert Pernersdorfer, German Words, an essay with the title Socialism and the Question of Nationality. In
1899, I guess.
Pardon?
1899.
1899, yeah, in spring. In which he establishes, next to the emphasis on languages, on language, as the only decisive feature to distinguish the nations from each other, an independent approach of analysis of social structures. Quote, all social cultural areas such as economics, religion, politics, etc. have undoubtedly emerged from certain cultural needs. Quote end. Like Moses Hess, for him, culture in this broad sense is to be understood as social practice of individuals that interact to satisfy their various needs. Quote, all areas of culture, language and writing, technology, economics, social institutions, jurisprudence, politics, science, philosophy, religion, art, ethics, customs, pedagogy, and historical life are nothing more than solutions to the problems of general human culture. These social functions derived from the needs of the intercourse of individuals. They have to be distinguished from the interests of single individuals working in the different fields. These subsystems develop their own interests, in question mark, that this is his term, with the result from, quote, ideals of the respective cultural era. The interests of jurisprudence are, of course, not identical with those of the lawyers involved in it. the interests of science with those of scientists, or even the interests of the monarchy are not always identical with those of the monarch. Rather, it must be concluded that these functions produce their own consistent laws. Zhitlowsky called them ideals, interests, or tendencies that determine the function, and individuals have to direct their own actions by obeying them within the subsystem. Unlike the Marxist analysis that dominated the social democracy of the time, Zhitlowsky not only takes in consideration economic power and interests, which result in cultural phenomena, but he dissolves the whole society into fields of interactions, all functioning according to their own subsystem laws, interact with each other on various degrees. Without this being valued in the discussion of the time, he views the systems no longer primarily as a sum of their constituencies, but as the relation of the elements one to another. Individuals conduct themselves according to their needs and interests and in different areas of their existence as element of different subsystems. Treat each other satisfactorily as possible for their needs on the basis of their economical, social, and cultural determined position in society. Defining the controversy between the competing solutions of different social groups and individuals as the motor of social progress, Zhitlowsky postulates a paradigm encompassing society as a whole, the economy as well as art, science, or religion as subsystems with their own ideals and tendencies. They all interact but follow their own, one is tempted to say, autopoietic internal logic. According to Zhitlowsky, nations are groups of people who solve the problems and tasks of living together in a certain way that differs, in whole or part, from the solutions of other groups. Quote, "The national then is first and foremost nothing else than the difference in the expression of popular life compared with the expressions of other people. And the more branches of culture this diversity encompasses, the more intensively it is pronounced, the more pronounced and sharper are the national emerges. Nationality is not an absolute but a relative term." Indifferent to Dubnow, for instance, and all the people who speak about Volksgeister. Consistent to this approach, Zhitlowsky sees a multitude of gradations between smaller individual peoples and people's families, often living together in a forcible nation association, Nationaler Zwangsverband, in which the dominant people tries to swallow up the smaller ones, e.g. the representatives of Russian pan-Slavism toward the Belarusians, the Ukrainians, and the Poles, or the pan-Germanic Prussians towards Bavarians, Saxonians, or Tyroleans. It is the task of science to start with the individual peoples. The forced associations, named as nations, are actually not nations, but, quote, a certain international phenomena. Politically, every individual nation is just as free to merge and absorb in a common national sphere or to stand up for its national independence. Although this is formulated in general terms, for Zhitlowsky, this idea finds its immediate application in his own effort for the Yiddish-speaking Ashkenazi Jewish individual people. Already in 1898, Zhitlowsky's essay Zionism or Socialism appeared in the abroad newspaper of the Bund, the Jewish Worker, under the pseudonym Ben Ehud. The contradiction between Jewish socialism and Zionism, which he classifies as strictly bourgeois, lies in the fact that Zionism sees the solution of the Jewish problem in a territory that Zhitlowsky considers utopian, at least in those period of his life, sees utopian to conquer. Instead, the socialist strategy is to protect the Jewish people under the tangible conditions of its existence from persecution and assimilation, and to consolidate its national culture. Zhitlowsky set out his agenda for the future of a Yiddish Jewish nation of culture. elevating language through the national literature of the level of the developed European nations, disseminating culture and science among Jewish workers, establishing Yiddish language schools and in universities wherever Jewish workers live in greater populations. If in the old world the principle was that every people need its territory, now in the new world the principle applies, quote, the people, this is the culture and its education. This the Jewish people should take as its principle. Then the Jewish people can live politically and legally dispersed and distributed among all peoples, and yet his people can remain Jews, live in peace with their neighbors, and have the same rights like them. The modern Jewish people are worldwide in its extension, socialist and secular in its content, and Yiddish-speaking in form. Third, Zionism as a strategy to implement this program. Although Zhitlowsky is an active partisan of and often representative of the Zionist party, the Jewish Socialist Workers' Party, his younger comrade, Moses Silberfarb, was the one to be able to start to realize the concept in 1917 in the revolutionary independent Ukraine. He became Deputy Secretary in Jewish Affairs and Minister, General Secretary of the Jewish Ministry, and directed the only historical attempt of this implementation in the Jewish context. It was Silberfarb who in 1904 promoted Zhitlowsky's participation in the group Vozrozhdenie, which, with the exception of the territorialism that Zhitlowsky was still criticizing at that time, had developed the same conceptions of the Jewish nation and its future. Most of the members of this group later joined the Jewish Socialist Workers' Party, which in 1917 merged with the Socialist Territorialist to the United Jewish Workers' Party. In those central committee, Silberfarb sat. Rosin, himself a leading member of the Vozrozhdenie and the Zerb, outlined the common basic positions in the foreword of the first volume of Silberfarb's writings in 1935. First, capitalist development first drew the broader strata of the people to the historical arena as active subjects and made them bearers of historical process, a position that Otto Bauer formulated prominently a short time later, that the thing of the historical nations. The result was not, as Kautsky had predicted, a general leveling of national differences, but in the contrary to their growth and the consolidation of smaller national cultures. This also leads to the growth of national aspirations to the Jewish people. Only this process, the cultural awareness and the social strengthening of the Jewish masses of the diaspora, could be in the long run accomplish the only possible radical solution of the Jewish question, the concentration of the Jews on their own territory. This gathering of forces is also the ultimate rationale for the struggles of the Jewish proletariat in the diaspora countries for their social rights and the promotion of their national culture. Unlike the Poalei Zion, which opposed any form of active diaspora work, the Zerb argued that the forces that should bear the future territorial project cannot come from persecution and destruction, but only from self-confident, strong Jewish centers in the diaspora. For this reason, energy must be actively invested in them, as the necessary national potential only could be developed there. The legal framework, which required the realization of the national personal autonomy, is national self-determination organizations at all levels of government and a national parliament, the same at their head. Even in the diaspora, the first potencies of Jewish autocracy would be created. Similarly to the programs of social democratic parties of that time, which distinguished between the socialist future and a section for the current day politics under capitalist conditions, the territorialist distinguished between the radical future solution of the Jewish question on its own territory as the last step of the national emancipation process and the demands for life in the diaspora in the places of their actual political activity. The programmatic formulation was, territorialism will be realized where and when social and national conditions are ripe. Which sounds very social democratic, just changed the term socialism to Zionism or Jewish national organizational starting point for the national personal autonomy are the considerations of Karl Renner. Already in his 1905 essay, The Principle of National Political Autonomy, Silberfarb cites Renner's work, The Struggle of Austrian Nationalities Over the State from 1902, in which he refers to Karl Renner in deriving the demand for the creation of a legal entity that represents the minority and its bearers of rights and duties that can sue for the rights of the minority or its individuals in the multi-ethnic state. Unlike the Bund, which also refers to Renner and Bauer, Silberfarb considers the separation of the daily life world connections on one hand into cultural, self-governing and otherwise political economic to be organized by the state to be artificial. He considered self-organization only for national culture far from sufficient or even realistic. Each nation is anxious to organize its entire social life independently. The demarcation must be based approximately on the division of competence spheres between those, in those days, the all Austrian Reichstag and the state parliaments. He proposes the following definition, quote, all questions connected with the inner life of the nations a nation are answered and satisfied by autonomous national bodies whose power does not extend beyond the narrow national circle. The questions of social life, which include the interests of several or all nationalities living in the respective state, subordinate under the competence of provincial or state institutions. These institutions are to be constituted on a democratic basis, headed by the respective provincial and national parliaments. They are to be given the right to impose taxes on members of their own nation to finance their activities. A national ministry as a body of the limited sovereignty of their field represents the nation inside the general national state. Result, in view of his time, Austria and the Tsarist Empire, the states of nationalities reformed in the sense of Silberfarb, still appear to be federal territorial, but at the same time he intends to establish a non-territorial national structure in which each nation develops as much as possible its own solutions to different issues of internal life and only leaves those affairs to the general assemblies that are common to all citizens. In 1917, for a short time, Silberfarb was given the opportunity to start to realize his ideas in the free revolutionary Ukraine. It is impossible to estimate which conflicts under permanent governmental conditions would have to be resolved by the public structure he invented. Even the distinction of the respective competences between national and general state affairs were not finally decided. At first, a hetman, supported by the German Reich, prepared a quick end to the project, and then, after the Bolsheviks conquered the Ukraine, there never again was a political space left for such concepts. After the Shoah, the people for whom this concept had been developed were not more alive. Whether these ideas for an united Europe contain fruitful suggestions must be discussed elsewhere.